Welcome to today's Explainer, looking at the Zodiac legacy, ciphers, taunts, and unsolved terror. So between 1968 and 1969, an absolute phantom terrorized Northern California. And, what makes this case still stick with us all these years later isn't just the tragic loss of life, it's the completely bizarre, twisted psychological game the perpetrator played with law enforcement, the press, and really the entire public. Let's get right into it.
Imagine you're a police dispatcher working a totally quiet night shift, and you pick up the phone. The voice on the other end says, "I wish to report a double murder. If you go 1 mile east in Columbus Parkway to a public park, you will find the kids in a brown car. They've been shot with a 9mm Luger. I also killed those kids last year. Goodbye." Just take a second to let that reality sink in. That wasn't a witness calling. The killer himself was calling the police directly to report his own crimes, basically making sure the authorities linked his horrifying acts together.
Okay, let's dive into this. Why on earth would a serial killer actually report his own crimes? It's really the central psychological mystery of this whole case. Because think about it, most criminals, especially serial killers, they operate in the shadows, right? They actively avoid detection. They want to stay completely anonymous. But the Zodiac? He was doing the exact opposite. He was actively seeking an audience. He wasn't hiding. He was literally announcing himself to the world. To wrap our heads around this mindset, we need to look at how his terrifying campaign actually started, and honestly, just how quickly it escalated.
So the nightmare kicks off with a totally sudden attack on 2 teenagers. 16-year-old Betty Lou Jensen and 17-year-old David Arthur Faraday were murdered without any warning while just parked on a quiet road. Then we jump forward 6 months. A second couple, parked just 4 miles from that very first crime scene, is gunned down. One was killed, but miraculously, one survived. That survivor, Michael Majo, managed to provide a description: a heavy-set white man around 5 foot 8 inches. And it was actually on this exact same night that the Zodiac made that chilling phone call we just talked about. Then, just 1 month later, the escalation hits a whole new level. The letters begin.
And that brings us to a really unsettling realization. He wasn't just killing, he was performing. Just a month after that second attack, newspapers started getting letters from the Zodiac killer. But he wasn't just confessing, no. He demanded that the papers publish his letters right on the front page, and he threatened a massive killing spree if they refused. He included these incredibly disturbing details that literally only the real killer could know. He wanted the credit. He wanted to generate pure fear. But most importantly, he wanted total narrative control in the press. He totally separated himself from your typical killer by turning his crimes into this twisted public spectacle.
Well, the performance took an even darker turn in November 1969. Zodiac wrote another letter to the press, and it contained this exact threat: "I shall no longer announce to anyone when I commit my murders. They shall look like routine robberies, killings of anger, and a few fake accidents." Just pause for a second. Think about the massive weight of those words. Up until this point, he was actively claiming his crimes. Now, he's promising to completely camouflage them. This one single sentence completely shifted the entire stakes of the investigation.
So the crucial point is, put yourself right in the panicked mindset of Northern California in the late 1960s. Because of that specific letter, any unsolved murder, any robbery gone wrong, literally any fatal car crash on the highway could potentially be his work. The psychological warfare here was just brilliant in its absolute cruelty. Suddenly, law enforcement had zero definitive way of confirming whether a tragedy was just a horrible tragedy or if it was the Zodiac killer. He effectively weaponized the everyday anxieties of the public and just used it against him. As this psychological warfare dragged on over the next couple of years, the Zodiac kept sending letters. And in those letters, he actually started tallying his score. He claimed responsibility for 37 lives, 37 people he supposedly murdered. And man, this massive number just threw absolute gasoline on the fire of public panic. It turned him into this almost mythic boogeyman in the American consciousness. But as investigators started really digging into the evidence, a very different picture started to emerge.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the massive, undeniable gap between his claims and reality. While the Zodiac claimed 37 victims, law enforcement was only ever able to officially confirm 5. And what's really notable here is that none of those confirmed murders happened after 1969. This discrepancy is still one of the most hotly debated aspects of the entire case. Was the Zodiac killer just drastically exaggerating his numbers to inflate his own legend and, feed his massive ego? Or Tying it back to his threat about staging fake accidents, are there actually dozens of hidden victims out there that the police simply never managed to connect to him?
To really understand how he toyed with the authorities, we have to look at his signature move, his ciphers. Basically, a cipher is a secret or disguised way of writing, a code. His letters to the press weren't just standard written threats. He mailed these wild, complex grids of symbols and letters, basically taunting that if the police could crack them, they would reveal his identity. And these definitely weren't simple weekend puzzles. They were incredibly sophisticated codes that absolutely baffled top cryptographers, law enforcement agencies, and even brilliant amateur code breakers for decades. It was the ultimate taunt. Let's just trace the incredible journey of these ciphers for a second. For over 50 years, several of his codes just sat there, completely unsolved, gathering dust in FBI files. But the thing to remember is, this case isn't just ancient history. It is highly active today. In December 2020, more than half a century after it was mailed, one of his most infamous ciphers was finally cracked. It was done by this amazing team of independent code breakers working together, and it was a massive breakthrough. But it really only revealed more of his twisted philosophy and sick taunts. The one thing it didn't reveal? His name. Even from the grave, or, well, wherever he is, the guy was still playing his game.
Which brings us to a really frustrating reality. Despite this enormous, decades-long investigation that spanned multiple police departments, the FBI, literally thousands of tips from the public, advanced forensic techniques, and even modern DNA technology applied by cold case units, we still have zero conclusive identification. Over the years, journalists, investigators, and amateur sleuths have pointed the finger at several suspects, but we have to be absolutely clear on this. No one has ever produced a totally conclusive, universally accepted identification. So, despite all our massive leaps in modern technology, he somehow beat the system.
And honestly, this is exactly why the case continues to haunt America. Think about it. Serial killers usually stop for one of three reasons, right? They die, they go to prison for something else, or they get caught. But the Zodiac killer, all the evidence suggests he didn't just disappear by accident. He vanished from public violence completely by his own will. He actively demanded recognition, he relentlessly toyed with the press, and then he just stopped. He left behind unsolved ciphers, unconfirmed victims, and this terrifying legacy where he, and only he, dictated the terms.
Which leaves us with this final, genuinely haunting question to ponder as we wrap up this explainer. Did the Zodiac killer simply choose to walk away and live a quiet life, his twisted thirst for attention finally satisfied? And, even more chillingly, buried somewhere in those decades of dusty files, thousands of public tips, and unsolved ciphers, is his real name still sitting there, right in plain sight, just waiting to be noticed? Thanks so much for joining me to explore this incredibly complex mystery. And hey, I definitely encourage you to keep questioning the evidence in front of you.